Welcome to the Knit+Sip Podcast. I'm Kate.
I'm Sarah.
Thanks for tuning in, y'all. We're here to talk today about why we might alter some patterns. So for some of you who maybe haven't been knitting for a while and are curious about altering patterns, let's debunk and talk about a few things that we've experienced. So when I first thought about altering patterns, it seemed pretty far out of reach for me. And I think a lot of people think that way too. Even really experienced knitters I talk about there seems to be like this taboo around altering patterns and not going off script. And I think that we all realize that everyone's a different shape and size. We all have different preferences. And I don't know if it's that far out of reach as you might think. So let's talk a little bit about what are a few reasons why we might alter patterns.
Most for me, I feel like the main thing I do is crop the body because I have a really short torso. So like general fit of like or length of sleeves and body is a very common modification. Body is really easy, especially if there's no like decreases or increases or anything. So but yeah,
and sleeve length too.
Fit for sure. If you want to have like for like the underarm cast on, if you're doing a top down sweater, you could just like decrease the amount of stitches to decrease the circumference of the body, or you could add more so it would be wider under the arm and wider around the body in general. So yeah, those are probably the easiest ones that I have done for fit specifically. But yeah,
fit's a big one. I think that's a good point. And then you brought up underarms too. So I think that some patterns will have built in how to not get underarm holes, but I always tend to picking up more stitches underneath the arm to avoid holes. And then I just decrease them in the first round. Usually in a sweater, you're not going to necessarily have a decrease the very first round after you pick up, but I will add that in order to not get a hole. So that's another, I hadn't even really thought about that until you brought it up, but that's another common one. So I guess that kind of brings us to maybe fixing something in the pattern that you don't like. And so that could be, that's an example, I think, of that. So other fixes maybe that I've done would be an alternative cast on or bind off. So if there's a rib, I love to do a tubular cast on or an Italian bind off. So that's something else that you can make a decision on whether or not you want to alter is your cast on or your bind off.
I do that one a lot too.
So looks, I guess, fit and looks are a couple of reasons why. Talking about yarn too. So I think you probably do this, altering a pattern to fit a yarn that you love. Let's talk about that because that's, I think, an important point, especially for somebody starting out making garments. What are some things that you consider? I typically advise people who have not made a sweater, maybe it's their first sweater, to not necessarily go off script. So I think if this is one of your first couple of garments, really stick to what the pattern says. I used to think I could get really cute with stuff as a beginner and go totally off script, and I maybe wouldn't advise that if it's one of your first couple of garments, but I think it doesn't take long to build up to having the confidence to do that. So what are some experiences you've had with altering a pattern to fit a yarn you love?
So you should gauge swatch first. But if I know I'm knitting off gauge, I will either knit a size down or size up depending on what I'm doing. So if my gauge is more dense, I'll knit a bigger size. And if my gauge is less dense than what the gauge originally suggests, I'll knit a smaller size, which is usually a little hard because I either knit the first or second size. So that's when I go to reducing the amount of like underarm stitches and stuff. Or like decrease or doing less increases around the yoke, or doing less length before joining for a drop shoulder. Another way is, if you want to get super technical, is like calculating the amount of stitches you get for your gauge and then finding the pattern or finding the size based off your stitch count, which is a lot harder and a lot more math oriented. But I have tried to do that before and it didn't necessarily work out for me because I had the wrong measurement. So, but theoretically that should work. But
theoretically.
So
I like the point you brought up. So I will tend, and this is me, so this is, take this for what it's worth. I think talking about altering patterns, I would like to advise you guys to do research on that. So, you know, what we're giving you are things we've experienced, but this is not, you know, we've not been knitting for decades or necessarily.
Yeah.
So I think, you know, do your own research on this, but I know you have said before that you've altered a needle size as well. I will more tend to alter the size garment I'm making, so like to size up or to size down rather than altering a needle size. But I will say I often don't go off script as far as what yarn it calls for, so I could see altering your needle size as an option to hit gauge too, and a lot of patterns will tell you that, you know, whatever they'll say, this size needle or whatever size to hit your gauge. And so that gives you a little bit more flexibility too when you're thinking about altering either, you know, the size of the garment, so you can size up or down on the garment. You can do a little bit of math and figure out a different number of maybe like stitches, or you can figure out a different needle size to hit your gauge.
Yeah, I was swatching before I came over here, and I was trying to use that really dark purple yarn I got at Rhinebeck.
Yes.
And I think
the maple one.
Yeah,
that's pretty.
The pattern I was doing, swatching for, it's the Zachary Cardigan. It's kind of like a mock neck cardigan.
Oh, nice.
And it's raglan.
Okay.
And it has like rolled edges, but it calls for a 18 stitch gauge with 4.5 millimeters, and I had to go down to a 4 millimeter to get that gauge because I originally got my 18 stitches was like 4.5 inches or something, so I went down the size and I got the stitch count, or I got the right gauge for that. So yeah,
nice.
So I figured out that I'm apparently a loose knitter. So.
I am a loose knitter. I know this. And so that was going to be another thing that I say too. And again, this is maybe not good advice. It's just what I do, is that I will often not swatch because I've made, because I have made so many things over the years that I rather know what my gauge is going to be per yarn weight. Yeah. So it's just an experience thing where I know I'm a little bit of a loose knitter, and I would rather size down a garment size because I know that's what it's going to end up with. Now, I will also say that in doing that, I do always check my gauge. So like as far as when I'm going along in the pattern, to make sure that I'm not too far off.
Right.
So, but I almost prefer just pushing forward and checking it then. And so I guess all of this is to say that when you're altering a pattern, you have to be willing to rip out. You have to be willing for it not to be perfect. So if you're altering something and changing what's already been test knit, it may not be perfect. So you either have to be able to live with that and proceed with the pattern. If it ends up not being perfect, you have to be able to live with whatever you're doing, or you have to be able to accept that you're going to rip back.
Yeah, so for this yarn, the reason I actually was swatching is because the yarn says it's a sport rate, but it's like more like an Aran, like a worsted.
That's kind of a big difference.
So I was looking at the Ravelry yarn page for the specific yarn, and like it says it's a sport, and it says to use 3 to 3.75 millimeter needles. I was like, it was like really thick yarn.
Yeah,
I was like,
that doesn't feel right.
It's 200 yards per 100 grams. So that makes sense.
So that makes sense for it. Yeah. Okay. So that's another thing too, is the more that you knit and the more that you get comfortable with understanding yarn weights, you can look at something and kind of say, hey, I think this is a little bit different.
Yeah.
And then adjust either your gauge or what you're doing based on that. I feel like a few of the yarns that not just you, but some of the other folks had gotten at Rhinebeck, I feel like we were saying that. We were wraps. I will get a tool, wraps per inch. So I will show you a great tool. Yeah. And it is a major lifesaver to have that, because your sanity check is a really good thing, but then to wrap it out, you know, is another thing, just to be exact.
Yeah.
So have you ever altered a pattern based on pure curiosity? Let's talk about that. Steeking a cardigan, maybe?
Well, that was because I was lazy. So, the only thing that I've steeked so far was my sister's cardigan that I did finish this morning. I finished it after lunch today, actually, and then it's blocking right now. But
we'll put a picture of that too.
Yeah, so I steeked that because I was tired of knitting flat, because I hate that yarn together. Like, those two yarns together is not a good idea. But I will only knit cotton merino with cotton merino only. But so the steeking went well. I guess it's just like watching videos on how to do it. You just sew down the sides and then cut up the middle, and then when you're picking up the stitches, I also did a crocheted reinforced thing.
Oh, nice.
Next to the pickup of the stitches.
Sure.
And then I sewed it down with like a needle and thread on the inside to make it flat, like the cut part.
Right.
But yeah, that's like a way to knit a cardigan if it's just flat, or if it's knit flat in the pattern, you can just cast on like 5 extra stitches before it's telling you to just knit straight down for the body. And then later you sew up where the first and the last stitch that you cast on is, and then you cut up the middle and fold it over and pick up the button band. So,
and again, research. So maybe we can
post
blogs.
Yeah.
I was gonna say maybe we can post some links about Steeking.
Yeah, I can do that
in the description for the podcast, because we're giving you some good information, but we have also done our research. So I think no shortage of research can be done when you're altering a pattern or coming up with some new ideas for things.
Yeah, Steeking is all about just like figuring out there's a couple with different ways you can do it, and a couple different ways to reinforce your cut edge. Some people felt it with like a felting needle, the crocheted reinforced part seam, and then just sewing up. People do like zigzag stitch, bunch of stuff. So
we've talked about some of the easiest things to adjust about a pattern are going to be the length. That's a pretty easy one. What is maybe the most difficult thing that you've ever adjusted about a pattern, and did it work out?
Probably yoke depth.
Okay.
Especially if it's something that's not a drop shoulder. I feel like drop shoulder, you just stop knitting.
Right. Right, you do.
Yeah. So for raglan, you have to more rapidly increase, I guess, if your row gauge is too few rows based on what the gauge says. So that's what I have to do a lot, because my row gauge is usually longer per amount of stitches I have, so I have to cut it short. So you either you increase more rapid than it tells you to do in the pattern, or you can just stop knitting to see if it still fell around your arms and your chest. So.
And then consider the number of stitches that the pattern. So that's why maybe the more rapid increase, considering the number of stitches you're supposed to ultimately end up with, if that's the measurement that you want to end with.
Yeah. There's more complicated ways you could do that, but circular yokes are really hard to adjust row gauge too, because of the way that you're increasing like in a certain pattern. It's usually harder. Same with like colorwork yokes. That's a circular yoke usually, but colorwork circular yokes are pretty hard to do, because you have to cut the colorwork short, or you have to like add rows, which you could just keep knitting in the round. But yeah, that's definitely probably the hardest modification. Yeah, or adding a pattern to the stockinette pattern. You can do that too, like just texture,
a lace or something. Yeah. I've done that actually before. I'll have to bring that pattern out. So there's a pattern called the Perfect Knit Tee.
Yeah.
And I was using it as a stash buster. It's a DK weight pattern. It's pretty easy and straightforward. It's a raglan, and so I had done the raglan the way it called for, but then I made the body a lace pattern. So I found a lace pattern in Vogue Knitting that ended up mathing out. That's not really a word, but mathing out to the right number of stitches that I had. I think it was maybe a 6-stitch repeat or something, and I was able to recreate I did the front of it lace, and I think I just kept the back in stockinette. So, doing something like that. Or I have also split. So there's a pattern called, I'm not actually sure. I'll have to look at this and put it in the description in there too. But there's a pattern that I did it was just a tank top. And it was meant to be knit garter in the round, but that sounded like, why would I do that? And so I decided to just split it after the raglan ended, or after, the right here, ended the yoke of it. And then I just knit flat garter on both sides and seamed it together. And I also did that because I wanted to, I did a dyeing class here over the summer, and we had dyed a skein of yarn, and then I wouldn't have had enough to make anything out of it. And so I had over dyed a different skein, and between those two had enough to make it. So the front of it is, the base dyed yarn that I did, and the back of it is the over dyed yarn that I did. But in order to do that, I wouldn't have had enough to carry the color work in a circle because I just didn't have enough yarn. So knitting it flat and then seaming up the sides was the only way to do that. So I think that, that didn't take, honestly, a lot of thought, and I'll definitely put a picture and a link to the pattern in here, but that was honestly pretty easy to do and alter. I would say the hardest thing, and I will show you what I'm doing, one of the things I'm working on right now, not that it's hard necessarily, but it's very different from what the pattern calls for. So we're going to see how this works out. So this is I'm not probably going to say this right, the EUN sweater, EUN sweater. And it calls for a collar that is folded over, but I decided to do corrugated ribbing. We were texting about that the other day, about if you've done corrugated ribbing, and I did my research. I watched a video, and I realized that with the color work and carrying the floats, folding the collar over, it was going to be really, really thick. So I did a tubular cast on and then manipulated it to 2x2 ribbing, which there's a great Andrea Mowry video on how to manipulate a tubular cast on to 2x2. And so then I did the 2x2 corrugated ribbing, and now I'm on to the body of the sweater, but I will also be doing the corrugated ribbing for the bottom. So if you look at and for the sleeves. So we're going to see how this works out, because it's definitely going to change the overall. It's flat, right? Because so if you look at this pattern, we'll put a link and a picture of the pattern. It's a very split hem, so it splits, I don't think, too far after you join for under the arm.
Like 4 inches or something.
It's, probably 4 inches or less after you join under the arm. It splits, and so it's a very exaggerated split hem, and you've got the, ribbing on the front and on the back. So the whole, it's a very large amount of ribbing. So we're going to see how the corrugated ribbing does with this pattern. And I think another tip that we can offer when you're altering a pattern is blocking. So like this, this collar, to me, it, doesn't look as neat as it could, I think. And I'm going to try to aggressively block the collar out. I had only previously manipulated 2x2 ribbing for a tubular cast on with a maybe DK weight yarn, and this is worsted to Erin. And so I think the look of it ended up being different than I had hoped for, but I also knew it had to be stretchy because the corrugated ribbing was going to make it tighter. And so that's another thing where I'm hoping, that the suggested number of cast on stitches is going to be enough to get over my head. And so here again, I think you have to be willing to make mistakes, willing to rip out, willing to know that it may not be completely perfect if you're going to alter a pattern. So, but it might be exactly what you want. So this is my candy stripe IU sweater, because we maybe hopefully are going to make the playoffs. And so if we make the playoffs and we end up going to a game, I had to have a candy stripe sweater, and that's the way I'm doing it. So we'll see. I think that's probably the most complicated, but I think the biggest point of all of this is we wanted to offer to you guys that altering a pattern is not necessarily for someone who's been knitting for decades and writes their own patterns and feels like they have a ton of experience. If you do your research, if you're willing to swatch and willing to just try a couple of things, then you can alter patterns too. And there are lots of reasons lots of ways to do it, and there's lots of good resources, either on YouTube, on blogs, talking to maybe other people, if you're lucky enough to have a knitting group, talking to other people about things that they've done to alter patterns. And please ask us questions too. So if you're thinking of altering a pattern and want some advice, please write in the comments and we will get back to you about maybe our thoughts on that.
Also, I was thinking, like, another really easy modification is just adding stripes to things.
I do love to add stripes to things. That's a good point. I think one of my favorite things about knitting, so I'm somebody who realized I liked fashion way too late in life to do anything about it. I was a business major, but because I grew up most of my life as an athlete, and so I wore basically just sweats And that was kind of my identity and who I was. And then all of a sudden when that ended and I had to wear real clothes, I realized that I really liked fashion. And so I think that's one reason I really like knitting, is because you can, do a candy striped sweater. You can make something your own. You can make it in the color you want. You can stripe it. And so striping is as simple as just, like you'd change a ball of yarn, you just add in a color. And if you're knitting in the round, look at some resources for like jogless striping and things like that. But stripes are also very, very in for this upcoming year.
Yeah.
And another thing that's really in, polka dots. And so even someone brought in a great stash buster project to show me the other day, where there is a pattern that has you do a double stitch over your finished garment
duplicate stitch
stitch over your finished garment to add different size polka dots to something. And that's a great stash buster too. So adding stripes, doing duplicate stitch over something, those are good stash busters and good ways to add a little bit of your own touch to a pattern too.
Another thing, with my sister's cardigan I just made, I did contrast edging, and so that is just, if it calls for a tubular Italian bind off, so you just knit the rib up until it tells you to do the double knitting, and then you just switch your color to a different color, do the 2 rows of double knitting in your contrast color, and then do the Italian bind off in a contrast color. And for the cardigan particularly, since you're knitting flat, if you're doing the button band, it'll have like a break between the collar contrast and the button band contrast, like right here. So what I ended up doing was, when I was doing the button band, I picked up the bottom, like skinny side of the button band all the way up and then back around, so like kind of like a U. But and then I just did the Italian cast off or bind off with those edges too, so it ended up being like a continuous all around the neck, all the way down the button band around the body. So
it'd be like picking up just this one's like, not a great example, but along the bottom
up here and then like down here, and then like you'd pick up all the way, and then if this was a crew neck cardigan, there would be like a little edge up here, and you'd pick up the top there. But it worked out really well. I was surprised. I was like, because I was trying to just like whip stitch around it to cover it up, because it's white and dark maroon. So I was like, how can I do this? And I was like, I can just pick up the stitches and then just do the bind off on the stitches I just picked up. So
all about adding design elements of how you want it to look. And there are probably patterns that you'll encounter at some point too, that you just want to see the finished object look maybe a little bit different than what the pattern calls for. Like you want to add, an extra stitch to the band or something. You want it to just look a little bit different. And so being able to use a little bit of very basic, and we all know I'm not good at math, so I really say very basic math. Math I can do. So if you don't like math, it doesn't have to get really, really complicated for you, or you can find a friend who likes math who can do it for you. But it doesn't have to get very complicated, but just knowing some of the basic stitch patterns, like knowing how that you're going to want, usually an even number of stitches for ribbing. If you're doing seed stitch, you're going to want an odd number of stitches, depending on whether you're knitting in the round, knitting flat. So do a little bit of research into the basic knitted fabrics too, and see what that looks like as far as, numbers. So if you're going to end up casting on, like if I, for some reason, think this is not going to fit over my head and I want to end up casting on a different number of stitches to do it that way, then I'm going to, have to think about, so that was an 88 stitch cast on, how many stitches am I going to want, keeping it in the same pattern. So being willing to just do a little bit of research and maybe a little bit of swatching, some math, things like that.
Trying on as you go.
Trying on as you go. Yes. I feel like Gigi made it was the one who said, measure 3 times and finish it once. So there's no shortage of measurement as you keep going. And I know I'm doing a good resource for that, these little cords. So this is a good way to try something on. I'm definitely going to be trying this on tonight by putting those cords over this and being able to slip it over my head and see how that goes. So the little cords that you can get from either your local knitting store or maybe even just Amazon, they're not very expensive.
So like silicone tubing.
Silicone rubber kind of tubing that you can slip over your needles and very gently
they're very handy. They're very handy.
They really are so handy.
I have my own spool now because I keep losing them, and my cat just takes them and hides them. She loves them, so which is surprising, but yeah, she loves it.
Another reason you might alter a pattern is if your cat gets a hold of it and knocks it off. So this was really supposed to have another round of decreases. My little brioche hat here that I finished for my daughter was supposed to have another round of decreases, but my cat decided to grab it while I was making dinner, and she just knocked off a stitch. So there's a drop stitch back here that I'm going to hide with a cute little pom-pom. And that's fine, and we're going to just live with it, and it's a child's hat. So also being able to figure out, if you're going to alter a pattern or something like that, what can you live with, if it's not exactly what you wanted. So possible mistakes would be another reason to alter a pattern. Yeah. So want to talk about what we're wearing today? Yeah. We're finally not a Christmas card.
I'm still wearing green, though.
You're still wearing green. I happen to not be wearing red.
I always wear green. So this is the Olga Sweater by Petite Knit. The green is Sandiscarn Double Sunday in some sort of like deep petroleum color, which is on brand.
Green, I think
it's very on brand.
It's very on brand. Yes.
And then the beige is Sandiscarn Pure Ghent and Natural Tweed. And this one, I don't know. I think my gauge was pretty off, so I ended up stopping under the sleeves. Or my row gauge is definitely off because I had to pick up more stitches than there were rows for my sleeve hole. So,
interesting.
Yeah, so there's kind of like a balloony color.
You figured out by trying on? Was it something you figured out after and you just decided to move forward?
I figured it out when I was picking up the sleeves, and I was like, I picked up like 15 less stitches than I should. So then I just tried it again. But I really should have just left it with the 15 stitches off because there is kind of like a billowing effect. When I'm like having my arm down, it kind of like billows out on both sides, but it's okay. I wear the sweatshirt.
Handmade with love.
I wear it a lot as a sweatshirt. I wear it all the time. But
it's a good sweatshirt.
The cool thing about this one is that the rib is still striped. So you end with the green and then do one of the tan and then indent the green.
Looks like an Italian bind off.
Yeah, it's tubular Italian. But the really cool thing about this one is I'm going to turn around. But the shoulder shaping, it's with short rows, but it's in the stripes. So it has the line right there. Yeah.
Oh, that's really
So
neat.
It's really, I was very confused when I was doing it because you're kind of like switching your color mid-short row.
Okay.
Which is what gives it that line down the shoulder.
It does. So maybe a more intermediate pattern.
Yeah, just for
doing that.
Definitely for the German short rows alone. Everything else is very simple.
Nice.
So just basic drop shoulder. So yeah.
So this is the Cinch Shag by Jackie.
I have no idea.
Right. We're gonna put that. I've met her. I've met her twice, and I don't remember her last name. I can picture her face, but we'll put we'll put the links in the description. But there's the Cinch Shrug, and this is her. Actually, I think this is the Saturday Shrug, and this is the Cinch Shrug. So apologies for that. Saturday Shrug, which does not have the decreases around the neck, and then the Cinch Shrug, which does. So the Cinch Shrug she came out with a little bit later, and it does have the nice decreases around the neckline. So I like both. I think they both have different, they're wearable in different ways. I think I wore this one to a wedding, actually. I think it's a little bit more formal where it has the tapered neckline there. And then this one is really just a nice thing to pull up over your head when it's raining like it is right now. And so a little bit different looks. But this one is, I would say the Saturday Shrug is a pretty good, maybe just like adventurous beginner project. So it will give you some striping. And so one thing I love to do whenever I'm doing a stripe is I really like to hold it with the same mohair throughout so that it dulls the stripe a little bit. And so I did that. So this is Chelsea Yarns in Stilettos and Denim is the darker color. And then London Sky is the lighter color. But I held the Stiletto and Denim mohair throughout just to dull the striping effect a little bit. I love your stripes. I'm just thinking for certain things that I do, I like to dull it. Certain things, it's great to have like the really striped look. And I think especially when it's, you know, not very many rows of stripes, it's really neat to have the actual stripe look. But when it's maybe large stripes, like this kind of calls for, I like to dull it down a little bit. And then I kind of did the opposite on this one. I actually held the same base yarn and I held different color mohair. So this is LBA. It's behind you. So it is this one and that light purple up there, but it's held with the lighter purple. It's the lighter purple yarn held with two different mohairs, and so that gives you a pretty good idea of what it kind of looks like when you know, the stripe effect when you do that. So a little bit less obvious of a stripe, which I was going for in this case, but yeah, just some tips on color work, I guess. If you're thinking of striping something, you can go all in on the stripe, or you can dull it down by either holding different mohairs with the same base yarn or different base yarns with the same mohair throughout. So a few different.
I will say the sweater is borderline like prison jumpsuit. So like if it was black and white, I would look.
That was not. It did not occur to me.
No, it definitely like I was I put it on for the first time. I was like, I kind of look like an inmate. But I like it. I love green, so
it's very pretty. That definitely did not hit me.
So
what are some other either finished objects you brought with you or some whips that you're working on? Let's talk about those.
Well, I brought my whole picnic basket full of whips. So
Literally,
this is just the first thing that's up here. This is the sweater I'm working on for my boyfriend. I just have one sleeve left to go.
So nice.
And this is the Eric sweater. Don't know who the designer is, but it's a free pattern from Felkalana. It has 2x2 rib everywhere, and then a mock
I like
neck.
the detailing on the back. Oh yeah, if you want to show that.
It's a saddle shoulder, but it has like this contiguous. So you cast on in the middle right here, and then you knit this way and this way.
Yes.
And then you knit this part, and then you pick up underneath right here and work down.
Nice.
But yeah.
Oh, very.
And it's kind of like a raglan too, where it has like the this part right here. Yeah.
Oh, very nice.
But I'm almost done, thankfully. It's half blocked. You can tell where it hasn't been blocked, but and with the same with the sleeve right here.
So aggressive blocking, again, another tip for you, aggressive blocking.
Yeah.
We talk about that sometimes.
I blocked this after, like right here, obviously, because I wanted to make sure that it actually fit him. Because as I said, I've been having some row gauge issues. So I wanted to make sure that it was going to fit him. And then next, this is Santa's Garden Pier again. Same as the tan in this. But this is my next exciting whip. This is a test knit for Rebecca Clow from the Crepe Bea. This is her Kintra sweater. 4-ply edition, so it's in fingering weight yarn.
Love it.
Yeah, I'm using all stash yarn. But yeah, so this is knit on 3.5mm needles. I went up to 3.75 for the yoke, and then I'm gonna go back to 3.5 for the rest of the body. But that's going swimmingly. I put that down because I was trying to force myself to work on my sister's cardigan, which is now done. So I'm gonna do my boyfriend's sweater, and then some other, and my Christmas sweater, which I have here, and then I'm gonna be doing some other fun things. So this is my Christmas sweater. This is my Luma. Yay. I haven't touched this in a while because I need to wind up some more yarn. But this is also another part where my row gauge was crazy. So I think this part, this like leaf motif was supposed to be on the yoke, but my row gauge is too long, I guess. So I added it to the body, which you can see here. And this one has short rows after the body, so it wasn't a big issue. I just did it after I did the motif on the bottom. But yeah. And I have to do about the sleeves, and there's color work on the ends of the sleeves too, which is gonna be gorgeous. This is in what's it called? Blue Sky Fibers Woolstock Worsted. And like their dark red and cream color.
So when you do color work, do you hold in each hand or one hand? Okay.
Yeah, each hand, but I can't really do English knitting, so I kind of just like drop it and then do it whenever I'm using that color. But
by the time I got to row 11 of 16 on this, I felt like my right hand actually worked. I'm right-handed. I don't know why my right hand fails to work. For some reason, it's my left hand that works, but I did finally achieve the, double-handed without dropping.
Yeah, I can like hold it in between these two, like just like behind the needle. I'll hold it like in between these two, but I'm not like twisting it between my fingers.
I finally figured out if I wrap it around my right ring finger, when I continental knit, I wrap around my pinky and then up and over my index finger. I had to wrap around in my right hand, I had to wrap around my ring finger and then up and over my index finger. I don't know why my right hand doesn't work. It's a very strange phenomenon.
Yeah.
Practice on that one makes perfect.
Definitely. So this is my Miles shirt jacket. This is, so from far away, it looks pretty brown. I've noticed, because I've shown it to myself in the camera because I want to see what it looked like. But if you look up close, it's like green and magenta, which is super cool. But this is Newton yarn. It's unspun yarn. The color Laka, but they
pencil roving type. Yep.
Yeah, but they do like they drop colors and they don't make them again. So it's like if you need more of it, you have to just like if you post on your story and tagging them, they'll repost you. So you like people can give you the extra yarn they have or something. So that's what I did for this. But
Thank you.
I ended up actually being able to order more because I only got 5 plates of this and I got 3 more. So I think I'll have enough because I'm holding it double. Nice. So
I'm really excited to source. I think in the new year I'm going to source from Wing and a Prayer Farm if anyone has ever heard of their yarn. So I'm going to get some pencil roving from them, but it will just be undyed. So hopefully it won't be, as much of a supply issue.
Newton is from Sweden, so you got to pay shipping, which is around like $20 to $30. But it's really not expensive overall. It's just the shipping which gets you. And then the last 2 things I have are my Steeking projects.
Ooh.
Touch yarn. I haven't
Steeking again is when you knit across, reinforce, and cut your work.
Yeah. This I have not touched since like July because I'm like, I don't know what I'm gonna do because, well,
it's big.
It's big. It's very big. I think it'll be fine because it's gonna be cut for the arm, so it just looks big because it
hasn't been cut. Yeah.
So it's gonna look fine as a drop shoulder because of the way that it's laying. Like it's like about the same as this one, maybe a little bit longer. But if it doesn't fit me, I'll just give it to Drew or something. But this is the Barcelona Olympic.
Very cool.
Dolly of Norway. But this is the Barcelona one. I think it was 1992, maybe. There's a ton of them. There was a knit-along going on over the summer because of the Olympics. So that's when I casted this one on. This is all Cascade 220 Sport. But yeah, I think that's probably why it's so big because I think that the pattern is a fingering weight.
Oh yeah.
But
so again, you found the right yarn, but had to alter some way for the pattern, or again, just kind of flip with the difference.
Yeah. So. This one I did do, so it calls for just a regular long toe cast on. I did a cabled cast on, cabled 1x1 rib cast on, which I think looks really good. But yeah, I love the colors, and also I did realize that if it ends up being too big, I could just steek further in the whole thing.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so I might do that.
Well, that's neat.
Yeah, it might. Well, it depends on if it's like the row gauge ends up, because if it's really long, then it's gonna look weird. So I haven't really touched this since when that Microsoft outage thing happened, and I ended up going to Tennessee instead of Boston. But
I remember.
Yeah, I got a lot of work done on that. Then my last one is a Sanduskarn pattern that I got. My sister gave it to me as a kit for Christmas last year. This one I haven't touched since June, but this is gonna fit me. Yeah.
It's so pretty.
So this is the Hege Damegenser, but it's in 10 Purgent. So this is a fingering weight bottom up steeked sweater. I love the colors in this. It's very springy.
It's so pretty.
Yeah, but I'm just working on the yoke right now. I think like this is where the sleeve starts.
Right.
or maybe it's down here. I don't know. I made it cropped, but I didn't add any steeking stitches because I didn't know that was a thing. I didn't really read.
What is a steeking stitch?
So you add when you're gonna steek somewhere. So like in the sleeves, you'll just cast on like 5 stitches. When you're trying to split for this, instead of like splitting, you cast on extra stitches, and that's where you cut instead of cutting into the pattern.
Got it. Interesting.
But I didn't do that because I didn't read the pattern. So I really advise for you to do that. And a lot also for steeking, a lot of the time people will just continue knitting a tube and not even like do shaping for the neck, and then they'll just cut a divot in for the neck.
Nice.
So it's not like choking you. So it's like a
And how did you find out that people were doing that? What was the way?
So what's her name? Handmade by Florence. Okay. She was the one that was running the Olympic sweater cowl, but she was doing which one was it? I can't remember which one it was. Lillehammer, maybe? Yeah, that's one of the other Olympic ones, but she ended up just cutting down into the sweater for her neckline for steeking. So you like do this, you reinforce it with the sewing machine, and then you cut, but that just like adds the depth so it's not like up in your neck. So I'm going to do that with both of mine because I'm just going to keep knitting and then cut. So, and then seam up the shoulders.
Another good resource is Ravelry notes. So when people have done projects and they've made alterations to projects, that they might list that in the notes in their project on Ravelry. So I really like using that as a resource too. And I bring that up because figured out for my ranunculus. So this is my ranunculus, and I am going to do a turtleneck version, which I saw one project attached to that in Ravelry, and she put in her notes that she just picked up and did 40 additional rows of ribbing on the top and to make it a turtleneck. So I also like using that as a resource if I'm going to alter something. And then, you know, the other thing that I do for altering patterns, so I had someone bring a hand warmer pattern to me. It's a really basic hand warmer pattern, but they wanted to add, it's like fingerless gloves. They wanted to add a thumb. So I had a mitten pattern saved that I used before, and I was able to just figure out that, you know, this is how you add a thumb to something. And so we just, you know, did a couple make ones, and we're going to split off for her thumb. So if you've ever used a pattern before that works, you know, make sure that you save those in your Ravelry library, or if you use Knit Companion, and then you can maybe pull other components from other patterns too that have worked for you before. So that's another good resource if you're thinking about altering a pattern, is things that have worked for you before that you think you might be able to pretty easily translate into something else. So, or like I said, Ravelry notes, because that gave me the idea for the turtleneck, and I'm very excited about my ranunculus turtleneck.
You do the short rows in the front?
For the turtleneck?
No, for this part is the short rows?
This is just a stitch pattern. So if anyone has made a ranunculus, it's funny because it's one of the most, I would say, made patterns on Ravelry.
It definitely is. There's like almost 30,000 projects or something.
It's been in the top for a long time. We're doing it as a store knit along right now, and it's so interesting because there are some people who, like me, who absolutely love it. Like I made it through the yoke in less than 2 days, and it kept my attention because almost every row is different in the beginning. So this is really just, there's a couple different components here. These are some slip stitches. This is going in between stitches, pulling a loop through and doing an increase by pulling a loop through and then knitting across the stitches. And so some people are really having trouble and having to like kind of get in a dark corner and concentrate because each row is different. And I like that aspect of it. I like the sort of counting and, you know, keeping me on my toes. So those are really just some slip stitches. Those are not short rows. There are some short rows, but they're all the way really up at the very beginning. So everything else after that is more just pattern. So you've got some like lace that when you make stitches, you've got, again, kind of pulling through some stitches, creating a stitch that way, and then knitting across. Like if you pull through between stitch, say 3 and 4, and then you knit the 3 stitches between, kind of gives you that look. So I've really liked the ranunculus so far, and I definitely would recommend it as a pattern. It's very fascinating because everybody starts on a size 10 needle.
Right.
And so you can do lace weight to worsted weight, and no matter what, you start on a size 10 needle. So some of the feedback people were saying was that they didn't want the really oversized look, and it is really kind of made to be a really oversized, lot of ease in the pattern. And so, you know, I think for me, one reason I did the lace weight, so I'm doing knitting for olive compatible cashmere and held with knitting for olive mohair, and both in bottle green. And I thought that even if it ended up being oversized, that it would be the lace weight yarn would be a good way to offset that. And I think a lot of people have said that too. Like, I know several people doing it in a lace weight so that you can kind of wear something under it and it won't,
you can still like see,
see your form under it, and it won't be so just big and boxy. Not that that's a bad thing, because some people want big and boxy. I just know for me, that was the reason I chose more of the lace weight yarn. So I just finished my daughter's brioche hat and my son's waffle knit hat. So the waffle knit hat is free breakfast. That's the name of the pattern. And then this is just I think it's called the basic brioche hat. So I finished their hats. They aren't blocked, but I will post some pictures of them in their hats. And then I've got my ranunculus going, and my, again, probably saying this wrong, EUN sweater. So EUN sweater. And I did just see that they came out with a EUN light sweater in DK. So this one's in worsted. And so
that one might be one I do.
That one might be a good option. I think a couple of people have mentioned that they might do the light version. I, on the other hand, I'm looking for a really, really quick knit that I can whip out before playoffs. Yeah. If we actually stay in the playoff running. So fingers crossed, we'll see. But so I'm looking for a really quick knit, and I think the worsted weight version is going to be a great option for that. So those are a couple things I'm working on. I do have the Astrid sweater in progress too, which is still on your knee.
It's okay. I don't need them.
So that is hibernating currently at the moment. And then some cardigans for my kids, which are also hibernating. I wasn't selfish knitting. I was knitting them hats. And then now I'm taking a break from other people knitting to do a little bit of selfish knitting, partly because this is, again, the store knit along. So I always like to get ahead of people in case they have questions. And then this is, in all likelihood, we're voting on store knit alongs for next year, which thank you for voting.
Yeah,
and this is in the running for it. So I figured if I was going to pick up a random project that I had no business starting, I would do one that we might do as a knit along, and then I can answer questions, which I'm glad I did, because if anyone's considering doing this pattern, I would say it is on the side of being less explanatory. They just assume that you're going to know things like resolving stitches, like resolving German short rows. They just assume you're going to go ahead and just do that. You know, things like that are a little bit less explanatory. They've also laid out the raglan pattern is a ribbed pattern. So within the raglan, you've got some rib patterns, and they basically just say knit in pattern without any further explanation of that. So you just have to kind of keep that in mind and know that you're going to be knitting across the raglan stitches in as you see them. And so, again, maybe not as good for a beginner because there are some assumptions to be made.
I've noticed that happens a lot with patterns that are translated into English from other languages.
Oh, and maybe that was it. It could be.
So I think that's that pattern.
I think it is like translated. You're right. So that's an interesting observation.
Yeah, because North America is known for having more explanatory patterns than the rest of the world. So that's probably why. But
I can attest to that for this one, which is fine. But if you're embarking on that and you're you haven't had a lot of projects under your belt, then just it's one to pay attention to, at least at the beginning. So, good pattern, though. I'm excited to see how the corrugated ribbing turns out. So stay tuned on that. There may be some aggressive blocking here around the collar. But proceeding, again, as far as making some pattern alterations. So, again, the whole purpose of this was to talk about, that pattern alterations are accessible. A lot of people see a lot of value in doing that, me being one of them. And maybe your pattern alterations as you get started is just what color you make things, striping things, and things like that. So don't be afraid to make your pattern look like exactly what you want it to look like. If you want to do a fade, figure out how to do a fade. There's some great ways to alternate rows as you're going down in a fade. And so maybe look at patterns that are a fade and pull elements of those, do your research, and it's all within your realm of slow fashion to make it yours. So thanks for tuning in.
Thanks.
Cheers.
Cheers. Bye. Yeah, I'm probably definitely gonna have to end up like cutting my Barcelona sweater, but it's okay.